hope that we would have more focused view on the three questions that we are going to discuss this afternoon in this session. Basically, they relate to the mandate of the selection committee, and I will be very brief in my comments with regard to the three questions that we are going to discuss. The first question is, should the committee focus on pre-agreed issues, fields, etc., or we should have a broad-based approach? As you know that both the strategies of having pre-identified areas for an award or a prize is being followed, for example, in the case of the Nobel Prize, but we also have a much more flexible format for the awards of these prizes, which are followed, for example, by the Kavali Foundation. The Kavali Foundation prizes actually rotate in several different areas year to year. So that's also it's an option where in advance the areas are announced, but they are not fixed in perpetuity, but they keep on rotating either on a yearly basis or on a 3 or 5 year cycle. The second question is, should the committee work on a consensus basis or allow for individual opinions? Some comments were made on this in the last session. It is obvious that individual opinions will matter, should matter, and do matter. But while one can define the protocol for arriving at a decision, an appropriate democratic process, I think eventually once the decision is made, it should be owned by all the members of the committee. This is how most international organizations work. There is a vote, there are different opinions, but eventually it is considered as the consensus view of the committee. And finally, should the committee recommend the nature of the Tesla Memorial Prize of Excellence? This is somewhat related to the question number 1. So I think we could go one by one, and I would like to initiate our discussion on should the committee focus on pre-agreed issues. Floor is open. Yeah, Mr. Shah.
Well, Mr. Chairman, allow me that following Wilder Fried's intervention just a few minutes ago to come up with a rather more general topic than just mentioning the 3 points you mentioned. I think the discussion shown today, we are seeing several enormous problems. It's very hard to identify one field. It's very hard to identify one candidate. It's very hard to find it at the appropriate collection point. I agree with Gilbert that the way we are trying to design a horse which in the end might become a camel, and what's even worse, it might take 5 or 10 years before it comes to a conclusion. And we learned that the idea would be to start the first prize next year. So my conclusion is, we have to introduce somehow, as a physicist I would say, more degrees of freedom, more flexibility to come to a solution. What could that be? My proposal would be the following. I think a prize can have different forms. It can be a lump sum. All what we are discussing today was concerned with a lump sum. But a prize can also be either, let's say, a chair, a professorship for a certain time, or could be called a fellowship, whatever you call it, or could discuss. But the main point would be, it would not be a lump sum, but it would make available some money for somebody who wants to go to an attractive place, which would be very important for his further development. So, and that could combine many things. It would combine a certain reward for the person, but it would also be an encouragement for him to continue in his work, he will become better. And it would provide enormous flexibility because depending on the available funds, one could get in 1 year 2 or 3 such fellowships in different fields. It could be given to an old man, it could be given to a young man, it could be given to a scientist, it could be given to a politician. And I want to mention that CERN has recently introduced an art prize, which consists that the paper is invited to spend some time and serve to get intuitions for his paintings, which is very much appreciated. The first paper just arrived a few weeks ago. So if one would, it could still be called a prize, but if its implementation would not be a lump sum, but this night or every one chair fellowship or whatever program it would be, would give all this flexibility to avoid that you have to choose one field, one man. And it's very difficult if you choose between the first prize, only one field and one man, and that was a mistake. That will be the end of the prize. Whereas if you have 2 or 3 or 4 fellowships, then the chances of creating a fiasco is much smaller. So, and then, of course, then also the question of selection and so on will become much simpler. And I think such a scheme could be implemented next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, the proposition is about having a more flexible framework where either a chair or a fellowship could be awarded to more than one and could cover several areas rather than just a single area. Next, we have Professor Ralph Weiler.
We're on the list.
It was the previous one.
Okay, good. You're done.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Okay, so Professor Lalligan.
Thank you. Just 3 remarks on the operational issues for the committee. One is the remark about transparency. I think we all agree about it. The question is transparency about what and on what points. Being transparent about how the process works, who can apply and propose, who the committee members are, that's fine. But there was a suggestion that a month after the session, the minutes of the committee should be made. I'm against that. Because you will inhibit future candidates if the whole discussion is thrown open. What you do after that all is motivation for the choice of the prize. That is clear. But I think you will make it very difficult for the committee or for future candidates if you throw open the minutes of that committee. Secondly, you have to, once you appoint a committee, you must trust them. You can't micromanage. And you must allow them to make their decision. I agree that it would be preferable, it could be consensus, but in the end they must make a decision. They can't prolong it for 6 months. So I would rather go with the idea of sufficient consensus, whatever that may be. But you have to make that decision. If you don't like what the committee do, you get rid of them. And therefore the system of a systematic change over the old one, and that's the way you can rejuvenate. But I don't think once you appoint a committee, you must live with it, and you must trust that committee. So the last remark is about the critical first phase. You can think of making a mistake 10 years after this life. You make it the first year, it's finished. So the first 5 years is absolutely crucial to establish the reputation of this prize. And I think there should be special measures put in place to make sure that it is an award that is recognized, respected one. Although there might be different measures, but there could be no doubt about the ability of that person and the worthiness of the prize. So I think that is very important. Therefore, we must also think in different phases of the process as it goes on the prize. If you do it well in the beginning, you will find more space to move into areas that are not so conventional or in different kinds of ways. But I think that is for the committee to keep that in mind when they make the first decision, the first 5 decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want just to comment on all 3 points very shortly. The first point, I think there should be a predefined field by the founder of the prize. And this could maybe energy or things like this, or transport, which seems to be appropriate also by the funder. Though this predetermination should be given a predefined field, and the funds should be given mainly to a network or a cluster. And this network or cluster should be, if possible, globally. So the best researchers in a certain field defined should be collected and funded according to the funds available. The second point, I think there should be total consensus if possible, but also simple majority should be possible. Because in a group of, let us say, a dozen people, everybody will not be in line with the majority, and I think simple majority is enough, and not qualified majority. What concerns the third point, I am not in favor to relate the price too much to Tesla as a person. So I would say the third point I would not answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Basically, you have suggested that the pre-agreed field should be identified. You also indicated that the sponsor of the prize could identify the fields. An alternate mechanism in the light of the discussion that we had in the previous session could be that the board of trustees of the foundation could identify also the field of the award for that particular year. So that will be more credible and a process that can be continued. Professor Slav?
I think we have made quite great progress actually through these 3 sessions that were aimed to identify problems and in a way find solutions. And I personally very much like the proposal made by Dr. Chopper. I think it's an excellent proposal because it contains many things that we worried about, and it gives us a very large flexibility. Namely, we have seen in the discussion, and I apologize for speaking a little bit longer than maybe what I should. We have seen that we do not want to repeat either a Nobel Prize or a Japan Prize or Catalonia Prize or anything like that. We want to be specific. We also are very concerned that what we want to do is we want to provide let's say, a reward to somebody who is upcoming. So not really at the end of the career, but maybe closer to the beginning of the career. So the idea of, let's call it chair, or even more precisely task, because this is a task that is given to somebody. Somebody actually has the task to be a professor at place A, and then later on B and C. As a matter of fact, we can see that, a continuation. I use the term professor, but of course, obviously, as Herwig said at the beginning, doesn't have to be a professor. It can be an artist, and it can be a writer. It can be a political activist that first goes to a place, let's say like University of California, Berkeley, or Stanford, or MIT, where there is a hub of various ideas, and then goes to a place where she or he may implement some of these ideas. So it has all necessary flexibility that is there. So it can be for research in classical scientific disciplines, which I think rather not, It can also be in the domain, for instance, of people, and that's one of the special problems, particularly throughout most of the world. It's a question how somebody who has good innovative ideas, but has the impediments of being implemented in a country where the innovative culture is not that developed, that person can start in one place and then move to another place and then move back. So this has a number of great possibilities. I personally think we should think about the title. It would not be a good thing to immediately link it with the professorship chair. That would not be a good thing, but it could be something like a special task. And then there is another thing. We do have, actually, I think it was Your Excellency, your former Director General, Federico Mayor, who introduced the UNESCO chair. And if, of course, you agree with this, I think it would be a splendid idea to have UNESCO somehow involved in this team. And as I said before, we are perfectly willing to include the World Academy of Art and Science. Around this table there are, if I counted well, 8 of us who are fellows of that academy. So we could, of course, being the world institution and having essentially all the scientific and scholarly and artistic disciplines, we could act as your agent. And then I think on top of that, the founder should appoint a board that should really oversee that and can guide. And as it was said by Eric, for instance, guide saying that the first one we would try to do would be in, let's say, inventions, as Tesla was, for instance, or in social inventions, as, for instance, would be another possibility at this time, since just 2 days ago, just yesterday, we concluded the money and energy discussion, so why not ask contributions in that field, And then, of course, that committee should gently indicate in which way. So it seems to me that we are essentially made quite a progress, and in that way, maybe we can fulfill what our president has given us as a task, to have definitive thoughts of implementation ready within few months, and then putting this general hold, and then possibly in a year from today, giving the prize, the professorship, the chair, whatever we find to be best in let's say, this time next year, or maybe a little bit later, to be sure that the weather is really very good, something like September. I will argue for September in spring would be a very, very good thing. I think at that time they can guarantee that they can make a good telephone call to God and guarantee a good weather.
Thank you very much. So I think you are supporting the idea of having a more flexible way of giving these rewards in advance,
Essentially,
in the form of either a chair or a fellowship or even identification of that task. One issue then which arises from this is that the task or a chair or a fellowship cannot be for only a year. It has to have a tenure.
Oh, yeah.
That tenure also then has to be worked out,
yes.
Depending on the kind of problem to be solved. So this detailing will have to be done if this particular model is adopted. Normally, as you know, that these chairs usually have 3 to 5 year horizon. And therefore, this gets a bit complicated in terms of managing over a period of time various chairs and fellowships. So that's something that we'll have to worry about. Professor Hills?
Thank you. I would also like to associate myself with the suggestion of Dr. Chopra. I think you're very much on the right target in terms of flexibility, but one of the detailed institutional design issues that has emerged implicitly in the conversation is the relationship between a board of trustees or other similar, whatever it's called, whatever the fiduciary body is called, and the implementing body. The principal job of implementation is selection. And it seemed to me that there would be great virtue in having a board of trustees focused on making sure that the right people were chosen for the selection committee, that money was awarded if it's money with appropriate rules and so on. But trustees should not be deciding what the fields are, or how many prizes, or who they, what kind of people get them. It seems to me the selection committee might be reconceived of as an operating committee or implementation committee, and within very broad scope, once the founders have said what they really want to do based on our compensation, etc., this selection committee should be given a broad latitude, especially if we are really thinking about some kind of maybe multiple awards to several people, and it's with different kinds of circumstances. We don't want to have the selection committee having to go back to the board of trustees and saying, is this okay, is this okay? They need to have a great deal of flexibility. That's the first point I want to make. Second point, and I just said, it seems to be, as the conversation has proceeded, that multiple awards make a great deal more sense than a single award. It would take enormous arrogance for any group of 12 people to say, I know who in the world is most deserving. Out of 7 billion people, we pick this guy. There's a lot more validity to the notion that we're going to make some number like 5 or 10 or 20 awards rather than a single award. I think that would actually strengthen the enterprise and not weaken it, and of course it solves all sorts of problems about focus and field and problem area. The third point I'd like to make is we really should erase all reference to university positions, faculty jobs, and chairs at universities. If we're serious about making awards to people who are going to change the world and they are young, we are not talking about faculty members. And we should not drag them out of their community and make them into a faculty member. We should reward them where they are for what they are doing in their place. And in this regard, the Heinz Awards, made in honor of the late Senator John Heinz, in environment and innovation and the arts and so on, are an excellent model. The Heinz Awards don't take the recipients out of where they are, they reinforce them where they are. Finally, we seem to have skipped a step, and that's the step of nomination. Not of committee members, but of candidates for the award. And I would just want to think, it's not on the agenda right now, but to throw in the idea that the process of identification of potential awardees should be a nominating process, not self-nomination, but nominating from the community. We can talk about some other time who could be nominators. One of the things that will do is greatly reduce the number of people you actually have to look at. Because nomination, if you make it onerous enough, will become a barrier to trivial candidacies and put forward really serious people for whom there is a body of interest of others who recognize it. Thank you.
I just want to broaden this scope of this session about nominations. Of course, the call of nomination is the best way to make the process transparent and accessible, but it is also possible to identify a collegium of nominators, although it will have its own problem, which will make sure that only very genuine nominations are received. So both the options are available. One is open call for nominations, the other is to identify a collegium with certain attributes who alone can nominate it. Professor Shah, do you want to have a brief?
No. I just wanted to clarify, I completely agree with you, but I think you would not exclude faculty members. You would not exclude faculty members. You see?
Wherever they are. I think the suggestion was whenever they are, they could have their award. Professor Bingham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. where certain people, I think, expressed that sustainability is broadly defined as the biggest challenge that faces us right now. And I think that should be the issue. I think that means you cannot predefine the fields, particularly, but I'll come back to that. I think it is possible to be a little bit more, give a little bit more definition to the concept of sustainability, perhaps, and I would offer this thought, that what we need to do is ensure that we can improve human well-being whilst reducing our ecological footprint. But actually, it's more than that. And well-being, by the way, is a measure that it is possible to measure. There are hard and soft measures of well-being. You can have life expectancy, which is a hard measure. You can have life satisfaction, which is a soft measure. And you can have a combination of the two, for example. But specifically, what we need social innovations, or indeed technical innovations, that allow us to improve the well-being of the planet's poorest without increasing their ecological footprint, and at the same time to maintain the well-being of the world's richest while we reduce their ecological footprint. So in that way, you can embed the social justice element, because it would be no good to improve the well-being of the people who are already the most wealthy, whilst ignoring those of the poorest. I would add one more. I think within that, you could specify certain systems that seem particularly dysfunctional, and these have been mentioned. I would pick out energy, financial systems, and food systems as being fields in which perhaps, if one were to have multiple prizes or awards, I would suggest that you maybe would pick broad systems to look at, which again picks up on comments that many have made. Recognising, of course, that in talking about multiple awards, we're making an assumption that Mr. Youssef has multiple pockets to fund multiple awards, but he can tell us what he's able to do. I'd have one more criteria, perhaps. I think that the ideas that attract, or the accomplishments that attract prize or awards, should be ones which in some way are offered to the global commons. So in other words, you can think of things which might meet these criteria of reducing ecological footprints while improving well-being, but if they are patented and are able to make money for the corporation that owns it, I'm not sure that that's where we need to be focusing our encouragement. I think we should be focusing our encouragement on those ideas which cannot be commercialised necessarily and are offered to the global commons. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to flag one issue, which is that if we are going to opt for multiple awards and for durations more than a year, 3 to 5, I think we should keep in mind that it requires very substantial logistics, organizational support to manage them over a period of time, because the number of such awardees could become 15, 20, 25 at a given point of time. So this will have to be managed if the award cycle is 3 to 5 years. So